microphone to share a very good experience. If there is someone that is arriving on the other room, please tell her or him to move in this group. If somebody asking to you why there is this situation, there was a little mistake. Rebuilding a Better World is the first European distance higher education activity with the Nobel laureate Mehmet Yunus after the COVID-19 emergency. A few days ago, or more Professor Yunus had another video conference with the Lateranense University, but was the second. we were the first. The video of the previous two sessions, really interesting, is now online on the YouTube channel of the University of Basilicata. So you can use the recording for your educational activity or studies. Today also we are going to record this session, and so also this session will be in the channel of the University of Basilicata on YouTube. Many thanks to the Professor Yunus and to all the people that cooperated to carry out this event, and especially to the responsibles of the University the Yunus Social Business Center of Basilicata, Firenze, Urbino, Venezia and Bologna, and to the Yunus Center of Dhaka. Today we will have a discussion about this topic, social business and its challenges. The speaker is Professor Jahangir Alam Chowdhury, excuse me for the pronunciation, Professor, of the Department of Finance and Executive Director of the Center of Microfinance and Development at the University of Dhaka, Academic Advisor of the Yunus Center of Dhaka. I remember to all of you that the next and last appointment is the 20th of May, with the Yunus Social Business Center Network that will be introduced by Zenat Islam and Shiab Quadr, and there will be the intervention also of the representative of the Italian Yunus Center of Bologna, Firenze, Urbino, Venezia and Basilicata. And at the end of the session there will be two really interesting speeches. The House for Peace and Experiments of Environmental Sustainability for Human Rights, with architect Mario Pulcinella and Enzo Curcio, that is the CEO of the City of Peace Foundation, and the new approach to the economy, with Father Enzo Fortunato, director of the press room of the Sacred Convent of Assisi. Thank you so much again to all of you. Please, to avoid to disturb the conference, switch off your microphone and camera. If you have some question, please do not use the chat, but send an email to info@cityofpeace.it, and I will invite you at the end, if there is enough time, to open the microphone. Now I'll give the floor to the Professor Giovanni Schiuma of the University of Basilicata. Please, Professor Schiuma, open your microphone.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everyone. And I would like to bring the greetings on behalf of the rector of University of Basilicata.
We can't hear you, Professor Schiuma. Maybe there was some problem with the microphone.
Can you hear me now?
No, we can't hear you.
Okay, so I have the mic on.
We can't hear you.
Okay.
There is no microphone on.
Someone is able to...
someone listen to Giovanni Schiuma. Okay, I can't hear.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so let's go, Giovanni Schiuma.
Yeah,
I can't hear you, so you go.
Yeah, I'm going on because I don't want to take too much time, and we are all keen to listen to the lecture from Professor Chowdhury, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Microfinance and Development. And Professor Chowdhury has developed a lot of research around the topic of microfinance, poverty, entrepreneurship. And we are really keen to listen to your lecture. Today, with the crisis of coronavirus, we are developing a clear understanding that integral development, where the centrality of humanity is essential for a new entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is not there for creating only shareholder value, but more and more social value. So I believe that this lecture will open up our eyes in the understanding of the social business and the challenges that we have in order to implement and to make the social business part of our everyday life. Once again, thank you very much for your lecture, and again, greetings on behalf of the rector, Professor Aurelia Sole, that due to other academic engagement couldn't attend this lecture, and so she kindly asked me to be your introducer and represent the university for this lecture. Thank you very much, and of course I'm going to be here listening to your lecture, and eventually, if we have time, to take part to the final debate and conversation. Thank you very much.
I haven't heard the intervention of Giovanni Schiuma, but I can give the floor to Jahangir Alam Chaudhry, the professor. Please.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to make this presentation. Basically, okay. Do you see my screen? Hello.
It's not coming up yet. So if you can share, we cannot see the screen yet.
No, I don't know actually how to share my.
If you go down on the bottom right corner, you have the icon share now.
Icon is there is icon present now. Should I turn this?
So if you click on that one, you can click on show your screen, and you should
your
be able
entire screen.
And then if you click on that, you should be able to share your desktop of the computer and then show the presentation, the slides.
Okay, so I'm clicking your present now, and then your entire screen there.
Yes, correct.
Could you see?
Yes, it is correct. So please click on share your entire screen.
Can you see now the screen?
Not yet.
Is it okay now?
We are not still able to see your screen. So once you have clicked on show your screen, on the top, you should see a menu, a list of a menu.
Okay, I think. Can you see it now?
Not yet. Once you have clicked on show your screen, you should be able to see a menu, a list of options. Okay, now it's coming out. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Can you see now? It's okay?
Yes, it is okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to make this presentation. I would like to thank Unicenter as well as our partners in Italy for arranging these lectures. I'm sure these lectures are going to help all of us to understand social business better. So today I'm going to make the presentation on the important challenges of social business in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Jahangir Alam Chaudhry. I'm a professor in finance at the University of Dhaka. I'm also the executive director of the Center for Microfinance and Development. And I'm also an academic advisor to the Unicenter in Bangladesh. I work with the Unicenter to help them to related activities related to academia. So this is the basically my introduction. So thanks. So for a nice introduction that was given about me. So basically today what I'm going to talk about the issues which are related to the reasons why capitalism has failed, and what are the failures of capitalism, and how capitalism has failed to serve the majority of the people. And I'll be focusing on two sectors in the United States. One is the healthcare, especially the pharmaceutical sectors, and the insurance sector. And on the basis of two cases, I would like to make the point that present system of capitalism is not working. We need a change, and that change is going to be like initiation of social businesses all over the world. So this is what my presentation is going to be. So we know that nowadays what is happening, since introduction of the modern capitalism 250 years back, we promote individualism in capitalism, and this individualism, at the end, in the end of the day, turns into narcissism. And we know what is meant by narcissism. Narcissism is actually a phenomenon under which an exaggerated sense of self-importance, need for admiration, and the lack of empathy. And these, things actually make capitalism not working for the majority of the people. We know that, that Adam Smith, who is regarded as a father of modern capitalism, he coined a term and using a metaphor of invisible hands. And under this invisible hand concept, what we understand that all of us, if we do things individually for our own benefits, in the end of the day, these individual efforts are going to make sure the welfare for the whole society. And we also believe that these individual hands ensure the competition in the economy, and thus it contributes to the equilibrium in the market. And we also believe that society is benefited automatically if individuals pursue their own benefits without looking at social benefits. But if we look at the extent of inequality and wealth concentration that exists nowadays in the society in all over the world, we can easily raise a question that do the invisible hands ensure benefits equally for everybody in the society? The answer is actually no. The invisible hands which are behind the capitalism are not working equally for everybody in the society. So some are get more benefit, some get less benefit, and in the process of that, actually inequality and wealth concentration is created. So we can actually borrow from Thomas Piketty, who is a very famous person who wrote a book titled Capital in the 21st Century. So he has actually documented the incredible rise of the top 1% in the world. What he says that if the return on capital is higher than the economic growth rate, and this higher return, which is above the economic growth rate, is the main reason behind the wealth concentration, behind the is the main reason behind inequality. So this is what he says. So now the question is that why does it happen? We know that in the society all our factors of production are not equally distributed. Especially the capital is in the hands of only a few individuals in the society, and on the other hand, the factor of production which is we call labor we have, all of us, we have this thing. So at the end of the day, what happens if the return on labor is less than the return on capital? Ultimately, due to the extent of disparity as well as the inequality inequality in the distribution of these two factors of production, ultimately inequality goes up, and wealth concentration happens. So this is what is happening, and it is happening, has been happening, and is going to happen in the future if we do not change the system that now exists. So why does it happen? And if we ask the question, actually, does the competition actually make sure that everybody in the society gets equal benefit? So if we look at some works, some articles from the literature, we can easily see that this is not happening. The modern system of capitalism, or the competition that we argue for in the name of efficiency, is not actually equally benefiting everybody. For example, in a recent paper, Armin Falk and Nora Sage argue that the presence of self-benefits and competition contributes to the erosion of moral values. For example, some business people do not bother about destroying the environment or adulterating food for maximizing profit. Similarly, Hongbin Kai and his colleagues argue that in their paper that competition encourages unethical behavior in markets. Moreover, Andrei Schleifer shows in a paper that unethical conducts and corporate greed are consequences of market competition. Corporate greed contributes to the collapse of large corporations like WorldCom and Enron, which resulted in job losses of thousands of people directly and indirectly, and thousands of people lost their savings due to the collapse of the share prices of these companies. So, but when we say this negative words, negative things about the capitalism, it doesn't mean that actually we are against the market competition. We are also in favor of market competition in social business, but our argument is that the way we promote market competition is not working, because of the reason the main fundamental assumption behind the market competition or perfectly competitive market is information symmetry. And we know that in markets, information is not equally distributed. Everybody in the markets does not have the equal information. Some people have more information, some people have less information. Due to this asymmetry of information, the competition, the efficiency, the competition that we argue for is not happening, properly, and that's why markets fail. And due to these failures, wealth gets concentrated in the hands of a few, and majority of people actually do not have the same share of wealth. Okay, so if we look at what is the extent of inequality that we have currently in the society. Okay, so we can have some examples. The transmission mechanism linking economic growth to the wages of workers appears to have broken. For example, average income among households in the lowest quintile, that means lowest 20% of the income distribution, was about 33,000, whereas it was 1.2 million for the households in the top 1% of the distribution. Between 1917 and 2007, after-tax income increased 275% for the wealthiest 1% of households. It rose only 65% for the top, fifth, and bottom fifth only increased by 18%. And that's true even adding all income from social security, welfare, and other government payments. Since 1979, median male wage in the United States was dropped by 1.4% for white men, and by 9% and 8% for Black and Hispanic men, respectively. Most American workers are still paid by hour. Half of them have no formal control over their schedules, and 2 in 5 hourly paid workers aged between 26 and 32 know their schedules less than a week in advance. And for middle class and working class Americans, economic growth are simply mere numbers. These economic growth rates do not mean anything to them. These economic growth rates do not contribute to the betterment or enhancement of their welfare. Now, let's see some of the outcomes of the failure of modern capitalism. You see, if you look at the recent report of Oxfam, publishes a report on the extent of inequality, especially wealth inequality in the world every year. So in the report, what do they say? They say that the top 1%, that means richest 1% people in the world, will own more than the wealth of the remaining 99%. And this, you see the extent of inequality. The total wealth of 1%, the top 1%, is more than the total wealth of remaining 99%. The 26 richest people on earth in 2018 had the same net worth as the poorest half of the world's population, some 3.8 billion people. The amount of wealth ownership of only 8 men and the poorest half of the world is the same. The world's richest 1% receive 82% of the global wealth. That means recent the changes in the global wealth, 82% goes to the top 1%. In the last 10 years, the wealth of the richest has increased dramatically. Only 4% in every only 4 cents in every dollar of tax revenue comes from taxes on wealth. So you see, the richest people actually don't pay even taxes. They contribute only 4% of the total tax revenue. The super rich avoid as much as 30% of their tax liability. And again, some more outcomes of the failure of modern capitalism. Poverty is not created by people; it is created by policies and institutions that we have built. Some 95 million people in the world do not have enough food to lead a healthy life. 12.9% of the population is undernourished. Malnutrition causes nearly half of deaths of children under 5. That means 3.1 million children each year. Today, 250 million children, 1 out of every 5, will not be allowed to go to school. For every 100 boys of primary school age who are out of school, 121 girls are denied the right to education. That means, you see, in terms of access to education, there is a dimension, gender dimension. That means girls are more discriminated against in terms of access to education. Every day, 10,000 people die because they lack access to affordable healthcare. Every year, 100 million people are forced into extreme poverty due to healthcare costs. So again, I have already mentioned that in access to education, there is a gender dimension. There are also the case of gender dimension in inequality as well. Men own 50% more of world's wealth than women. The 22 richest men have more wealth than all women in Africa. The unpaid care work done by women is estimated 10.8 trillion a year, which is 3 times the size of the tech industry. With less income and fewer assets than men, women make up the greatest population of world's poorest households, and that the proportion is growing. And if look at the literature, you can easily see that the households which are headed by women are more likely to be poor than the households which are headed by men. So this gender dimension is also very acute. Now let's see, go see 2 cases, taken from the United States. One is the healthcare, another one is insurance sector. We can easily see that how the modern capitalism is failing. In terms of health inequalities in the United States, you can see that the most affluent 1% lived 25% longer than the poorest 1% in the past. Low-income adults are more than 3 times as likely as affluent adults to have trouble with activities of daily living. Children of low-income families are more likely to be obese and have elevated blood lead levels than those in high-income families. 1 in 5 low-income Americans said they went without care because they couldn't afford it. Only 1 out of 25 high-income families said the same thing. So if you look at this point, that means 20% of low-income households in America do not have access to healthcare, proper healthcare. And in 2018, 70 million people in the United States were, graduated to the below the poverty line. That means they became poor due to the medical expenses. So they went below the poverty line because they couldn't be able to afford, and to ensure the healthcare for them, they had to pay a lot, and they had to become poor, and they had to borrow, and they lost their livelihood, and they became poor. In 2015, 1 million people declared medically bankrupt. Now let's look at the health sector again, and if we look at the case of a pharmaceutical company which is known as Biogen. So they have a, like, I'm taking only one of their products, Tecfidera. Tecfidera is a medicine for curing multiple sclerosis. And how greedy these people, that means in the health sector, you can easily see from this example. When they were allowed to have the patent on this medicine in 2013, they calculated, they determined the price, the wholesale auction cost, the wholesale price of that product at this determined that at 54,750. The same product they priced at 94,991 in 2019. So that means the period between 2013 and 2019, in 6 years' time, they increased the price of the same product by 137.37%. So that means, and if you make a comparison between this price increase with the inflation level during the same period in the United States, you can see the huge difference. When the inflation level went up by only 11.36%, and the price of the same medicine went up by 137.47%. So this example shows that how greedy the corporate people are in the health sector. Now let's go to another example. Let's from the same health sector. Is a Gilead Sciences Inc. This is a famous company. They were approved a medicine called Sovaldi, which has a brand name of Sofosbuvir, and they were granted patent in 2013. So in that year, they determined the price of for a pack of medicine for 12-week treatment at 84,000, and that means that they determined the price of the medicine taka 1,000, the dollar 1,000 per pill. So that means that treatment course had 84 pills, and they determined the price at 84,000. That means per pill $1,000. So then what happened? The researchers at Liverpool University in the United Kingdom, they actually went for calculating what is the production cost of the same medicine. they calculated that the production cost of that medicine for a pack for 12-week treatment was only 68 to 136. Even for urban purpose, even if we say that it is $150, then we see the production cost was 150, whereas they determined the price at $84,000. Okay, but interestingly, the generic version of same medicine in India is available at only $300 per treatment course. So that means $300 against $84,000 in the United States. You can buy the same medicine, same amount of medicine in India through paying only $300. So these two examples actually show that at what extent these people in the pharmacy sector are greedy, and how greedy are they, and how they are exploiting the people, and due to this exploitation, actually main sufferers are the low-income people, those who belong to the lower strata of the income ladder, and they can't afford it, and they remain out of the medication, and they eventually die. And we have seen that from our earlier slides that those who are low-income people, they live 15 years less than the people who are who belong to the upper strata. Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with Ms. Natoma Canfield. She is the lady who was actually the main person behind the Affordable Care Act, which is popularly known as Obamacare, and her case is amazing actually. She wrote a letter to President Obama in 2009 on 28th of December 2009, and she explained how vulnerable she was at that time. She was suffering from of cancer, and she was divorced 2 years before writing that letter to Obama, and she was explaining that in 2009 she was paying, she paid $6,075 in premium to the insurance company Anthem, and that same insurance company paid out only $935 for her. Despite that, the same insurance company raised her, insurance premium by $780 to $7,007, and she was afraid that she would be dropped out of the healthcare system because she was unable to pay that premium at that time, and she was afraid of losing her livelihood in the form of losing her job due to her illness. So, and then what happened? She explaining these, these issues and explaining her vulnerability. She wrote a letter to President Obama on 20th of December, and interestingly, President Obama took only 3 months, less than 3 months, to come up with Affordable Care Act, which we know now as, which is popularly called as Obamacare. In the middle, you can see that the letter which she wrote to President Obama, and on the right, you can see the response, the reply President Obama wrote to her. So now let's see, the cases of some insurance company. How exploitative are they? So this is the table actually. I have shown share prices of some companies, a sample of companies, but this sample is purposive. It's not random. I have taken 4 insurance company, 1 pharmaceutical company, And for the comparison purpose, I've taken two more companies, Ford and Walmart, for the comparison purpose. So I have got prices of 4 years, 2005, 2016, 2017, and 2019. Why I have taken 2016 and 2017? I have taken it actually intentionally to relate the prices of 2016 and 2017 with the Affordable Act. Now, with the Affordable Act and the election of President Trump. If you look at the red line, the growth rate during the period 2016 and 17 in the prices of stocks, you can see that the stock price of Anthem went up by 227.43%. For United Health, it was 37%, 38% almost. For Cigna, it was 29%. For Humana, it was 29%. All these four companies are the top, four largest insurance companies in the United States. Okay. And if you look at the blue line, I have shown the average growth rate, annual growth rate in the prices during 2005 and to 2019. So for Antenna, during the period 2005 and 2019, the price went up by 10%, whereas in 16 and 17, it went by 227%. Now the question is why? You see, after Obama, Hillary Clinton was competing in the election, and everybody, especially the insurance industry, considered Hillary as the continuation of Obama, and they took Trump as the discontinuation of the period of Obama. So when they saw that Trump won the election, they understood that Trump is going to actually dismantle the Affordable Care Act, that means Obamacare. And that was a good news for them. And that's why the share prices of all the insurance companies went abnormally up, during that time. And now I'm going to relate the prices of this, the growth rates of in prices of these stocks with the growth rate of the economic growth rate of the United States. Remember, I've already mentioned in my earlier slides that according to Piketty, if the return on capital is higher than the growth rate, this situation contributes to the widening in the wealth concentration. It enhances income inequality. Now you see, during the period 2005 to 2019, where the average growth rate of the United States was 1.6%, green line, during the same period, the growth rates of all the companies have except Ford, because Ford had a problem. Except Ford, all the companies have growth rates higher than the economic growth rate. So what does it mean actually? If economic growth rate represents the growth in the income of the majority of the people, and if the growth rate in the prices of stocks of the companies reflect the growth rates of the capital or the return they receive from the capital, from return on capital, then we can see that there is a huge difference. That these numbers actually reflect that, this comparison reflect that at what extent the wealth inequality is going up in the United States. Now I would like to take you to another dimension, the racial inequality and corona pandemic deaths. You see, in America, blacks are dying disproportionately. In total deaths, the contribution of blacks is 26%, whereas they contribute only 30% to the total population. And if you look at the poverty, again, blacks are the poorest. They are poorer than other communities in the United States, especially compared to white people. So you see, Why, if you ask the question, why blacks are disproportionately dying? Because of the reason they are poor, they don't have proper health care, and they don't have better health. And due to these reasons, they are dying more. So again, this also shows the extent of inequality in the health sector, in income, as well as in other sectors in the United States. Now I'm borrowing some words from a speech that was given by Obama just two days back. He was giving a speech, a convocation speech to the graduating students of 2020, and the words he have mentioned in his speech are very much applicable to the situation. You know, the scenario that we are seeing right now in terms of inequality, health concentration, and why social business is important. We can relate his words with the importance of social business. What he says, I'm reading out. This pandemic has shaken up the status quo and laid bare a lot of our country's deep-seated problems, from massive economic inequality to ongoing racial disparities to a lack of basic health care for people who need it. The old ways of doing things just don't work. That means status quo doesn't work. That it does not matter how much money you make if everyone around you is hungry and sick. And that our society, our democracy only work when we think not just about ourselves, but about each other. Remember at the beginning I said, the capitalism promotes individualism. It doesn't promote collectiveness or all of us in totality. That's the problem. And we can see that this individualism actually is not working. Rather, actually, it is creating inequality, and the way the corporate greed actually is behind the maximization of wealth, and that is actually translated into a situation that we call consumer narcissism. That means the temptation of having unlimited consumption of goods and services when they are scarce. So these people actually using profit as a vehicle to maximize their profitability and, you know, to enhance their, you know, consumption, and at the cost of the well-being of the majority of the people in the society. Now the question is that, should we allow this status quo to remain? Should we allow the status quo of exploiting the majority to continue, exploiting the majority to continue for maximize the profitability of a few? Should we allow a few pharmaceutical companies to monopolize the forthcoming coronavirus vaccine? Should we allow insurance companies to allow the most vulnerable people out of the health coverage in the name of risk minimization? The answer is no, we shouldn't. And the question is, how can we actually solve the problem that we have mentioned? The answer is that from our perspective, that social businesses can overcome, is the answer. Social businesses can overcome the above mentioned process. So now actually, since my presentation is actually related to the importance and challenges, I'm very quickly going to cover two challenges that we are going to face and we are facing right now in terms of promoting social business. One is actually, since we actually in social business promote social benefits rather than maximizing profit, and we don't allow the investors to beg their to take the profit, and they can also take back their investment. So the question is that if we do not consider profit maximization as the ultimate goal of social businesses, then what is going to be the performance indicator of social businesses? This is a problem actually. This is the challenge that we are facing. So basically actually, we don't have right now the mechanism of monetizing or calculating the values of all social benefits that we talk about, that we can go for. But you know, the researchers are now working, some of them are working, and some are actually trying to calculate the monetary benefits of the monetary value of social benefits. And one of the economists who is prominent in this area of monetizing the social finance is Abhijit Banerjee, who won the Nobel Prize along with his wife last year from MIT. So these people are actually calculating. I can give you an example from one of his studies. What he says that if we protect a child from malaria through buying an insecticide-treated bed net, spending only $4, it gives the people in Africa benefits of total benefit of $88 per year over the adult life of that child in Kenya. So if you simply spend $14 to buy a bed net, it is going to get benefits for the period, for the whole adult life of a child, and the total value of the benefit per year is going to be $88. So if the adult life of a child is like 30 years or 40 years, you can multiply 88 by that 30 or 40. You can see that what is the total value, and which is much higher than the spending of only $14. So we are actually working to come up with like monetary values of the social benefits that we promote, that we want to maximize for social benefits. Another problem is that since we do not allow the owners to take dividend from the social businesses, then what is going to be the motivational factors to ask people, to motivate people to make investment in social businesses? This is another challenge actually. So to motivate people, actually we borrow from social psychology, where psychology researchers, they argue that through helping others, actually you can get benefited. You can make yourself happier. So Professor Yunus said that through making happier others, you can become happier as well. If you help others, it makes you happier. So for example, we can borrow from two famous people, like Ando Oswald and Keio Otake. For example, Keio Otake says that that there is a close association, there is a close association between kindness and happiness in everyday life. Another example I can give you, Professor Robert Lane, he says that in his book, The Loss of Happiness in the Market Economy, says that the correlation between income and happiness is close to zero in rich countries, and it is negative in sometimes. Professor Oswald and his colleagues argue that happiness makes people more productive, and thus it contributes to the income assessment. So that means if we try to help others through social businesses, and that is going to make us happier, and becoming happy is also can be expressed in numbers, and from research we know that when we become happier, when we are happy, it enhances our productivity. When our productivity goes up, our income level also goes up. That means when we help others, that is actually translated into money or income in the end. So we can talk to the people. We can request them actually to make investment in social businesses, to saying that through these businesses they can make themselves happier, and it has got actually monetary benefits as well in the end. Now going back to Professor Yunus, what Professor Yunus says that current mechanism of current mechanism of capitalism is actually making us selfish. It promotes individualism. It doesn't promote collectiveness. It doesn't promote individuals in a society as a whole, in a society. And if we take, and he also says that if we can take out selfishness from current of businesses, then the whole notion of inequality and oil concentration is going to go away, and the whole society is going to be much more livable as well as happier. So that means we have to inject selflessness into businesses through promoting social businesses. we need to promote businesses in the areas like health, insurance sector, or in the sector of education. There are some products which we shouldn't allow capitalists to use those businesses or those avenues or those sectors to make money. And these sectors are actually responsible for bringing benefits to well-being to the majority of the people. We shouldn't allow them to exploit the majority. So, and that's why you need to promote social businesses. So this is my last slide. Actually, the slide shows that we arrange an academic conference every year. This year, we are going to arrange our 9th Social Business Academia Conference in Bogota, Colombia. Sorry that I have made a mistake while I was tapping. It shouldn't be May 5th and 6th. It should be November 5th and 6th. So actually, this is a mistake. So I request all of you to submit your papers and join us in that conference. So thank you very much. The link is given. We can go to that link to submit your papers. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you to you, Professor. Thank you a lot. It was a very sharp and deep speech, and it was really clear problem that the capitalism generate and the opportunity that we have with social business to overcome these inequalities and these problems. So maybe there is a Professor Schiuma that will answer something. Professor Schiuma?
Yes, thank you very much. This was really an inspiring lecture. Thank you very much. And listening your presentation and looking at the challenges that we have, in your presentation you have two dimensions basically. The first one is how wealth is shared, and the actual model, the capitalistic model, is not working. And on the other hand, you have the idea of bringing in the idea of happiness as a key value drivers for building social business. My question for you is, should we look for a different kind of business model, and where the shareholder value, which has been the main focus of a business, should be replaced with a different way of looking at to the value creation mechanism of organizations, where a more balanced dimension of value should come in place, and then to look for different way of accounting the value in terms of not only the balance sheet, but looking at different ways of identifying the impact that organizations are generating. Nowadays, we have the social. We have these not mandatory ways of looking at the impact of the organization. But if we should find different ways that, and making this mandatory, maybe we will introduce in the traditional capitalistic model different way of pushing the companies, the traditional business company, to be more sustainable and more social oriented. So my question for you, if we want to look at two possible solutions to be introduced in the actual model that we are realizing is not working, where your attention would be preferably played on? Because also the idea of happiness, which is a key point in terms of impact that the business is generating. But again, how can, from kind of more practical point of view, introduce mechanisms that could force the organization to look in a more integral way the value that they generate, rather than just to focusing on the shareholder value?
Okay, thank you. Actually, you see, the system that we have actually cannot change the current mechanism of doing businesses due to regulatory pressure, due to pressure from very wealthy people. Whenever you try to do something good through formulating some new laws, always these business people, they find the loopholes. They use those loopholes to get benefited. There are a lot of examples you can find in the United States. I can give you an example. Some years ago, a law was passed in the United States to change the inhalers that people use, those who have got asthma problem, because the pharmaceutical companies used to use CFC to produce the inhalers. So the regulatory bodies banned CFC. So what happened? That was done actually from the perspective of climate change. But pharmaceutical companies, they use that law to come up with new products and to raise the prices by 10 or 15 or 20 times. So when you say a law was passed for the good purpose, they use that law to get benefited. So this is what the current system is, and we cannot actually overcome and immediately from this. And if you look at some other dimensions of which are related to very close to social business, like corporate social responsibility, social enterprises, non-government organizations, aid, charity, we have seen that these things are not working. The models that so far we have tried in different parts of the world haven't worked. And there are some exceptions, actually, like Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. They have, but in other countries, actually, even sometimes the regulatory bodies are actually, they don't have that much capacity even, because all the policymakers or the lawmakers, they come from the richer class, the top class. So again, you see, these people do not allow the system to be changed. So the question is that we have actually looked at some other options, and we have seen that at the end of the day, that this profit is the main culprit, actually. That some people are using the profit to become greedy and to exploit others. This is the mechanism to become the richest, to have a competition of become richer, to accumulate the wealth. And we have also looked at the thing that you have talked from the perspective of accounting, actually, that if we want to promote social business, then we have to actually change the current system of accounting, and we have to come up with the mechanism to change the way we do the accounting thing, because of the reason that now the current mechanism of accounting actually is on the basis of profit maximization, and the profit goes to return earning, and that is added to the capital. And when we calculate the return on equity, that profit of the previous year is added to the equity, and then we calculate the equity. So this is actually another mechanism to hide the profitability rate of FDLE. If we calculate the return on equity on that part of equity which was invested at the beginning, then whole rate of return would be much higher. So whenever you add the last year's profit to the return earning, then the volume of return earning goes up and the return on equity reduces. And this is the mechanism through which they hide their return, actually. So the system is not working, and even the accounting system that we need to change, and we need to come up with a mechanism to do the valuation of these social benefits and to put this on the balance sheet and income statement as well. And we have to come up with like other, there is a stock exchange where they trade the social stocks, the stocks which promote social values or social benefits rather than they focus on profitability. So we call it impact investing. So we'll have to actually look at these things and come up with the solutions for our social business as well. But the point that I'm trying to make, borrowing from Professor Yunus, that we need to actually go for social business. We don't have any other options, and we have to make this change. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Professor. We have other two questions. So I give the floor to the Professor Remotti and after to Professor Signorino. And after we have to close because it's late. Okay. Professor Remotti, please open the microphone.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your interesting report. And I have a question for you. This about the role of the antitrust law, because traditionally antitrust law does not have the task of considering among its objectives the one of ensuring an equitable distribution of the wealth produced. This objective is considered an objective of tax fiscal legislation. However, I wonder if attributing this task to the antitrust authorities could be a possible solution to the failure of the modern capitalism. On the other hand, it would not be the first time that the objectives of the antitrust law have changed. Before the advent of the Chicago School, antitrust law sanctioned specific conduct that adversely affect free competition. After Chicago, antitrust law has set itself the objective, the goal of ensuring an optimal allocation. So, in your opinion, in the future, will antitrust law also be able to perform this function? I wanted two examples. The first one, the authority could be considered fair, a commercial practice that ensures fair remuneration for all subjects and sanctioning all commercial practices that determine wealth centralization. Or another example, that the authority could force companies, for example, pharmaceuticals companies, to charge a price that admits their earnings but guarantees the greatest possible distribution. So I want to know if for you this one could be a good option for the future.
Okay, thank you. We know that antitrust laws have been in existence for a quite long time. And these antitrust laws so far are not working. Still, you know, those who are the CEOs of big companies, Forbes 500 or, you know, top companies, they know how to exploit these antitrust laws. So we have seen that regulatory bodies haven't been able to execute these antitrust laws to make sure that everybody has equal access to basic needs in the United States. If you go to the United States, you can see that there are some millions of people who do not have access to basic needs properly, especially Black people or the Asian and Hispanic. So we know that even when you try to the best, you know, smart law you enact, always the CEOs are going to get the loopholes. As long as you allow them to maximize wealth maximization, you allow them to use rate of return, that means return on equity, return on investment, return on assets as their performance indicators. Because you have got an agency problem, you know, because these CEOs, they want to always maximize the profitability because that is linked to their own benefits. When they can show that the profitability has gone higher, they get a share of that profitability as compensation, you know, as compensation. So there is always tendency among the CEOs to maximize the profitability for their own benefit in the short run. They do not bother the long-term return, long-term issues or the long-term consequences, because the CEOs know that they are not going to stay as CEO for a long period of time, only couple of years. So they try to maximize as much possible in the short run and show the higher rates of return and get benefited. So as long as this, you know, behavior is going to be in place, you cannot actually use antitrust laws to make sure that everybody gets better. So we'll have to change the whole system. Until you change the system, it's not going to work. I have read out the words of Obama. He said clearly in his speech that status quo is not working. He was the president. He tried a lot, but he couldn't. And even there are lots of senators. You know, they try, but they fail at the end of the day. They fail to go through the two chambers of the legislative bodies when they try to have a good legislation. So this is the problem. So unless we try to change the system completely, unless we do it, it's not going to change. This is my point, and this is also a point of Professor Yunus as well. He also argues the same, makes the same point. Thank you.
Thank you very
much, Professor. And now the last question is for the Professor Signorino. And please turn on your microphone, Professor Signorino.
Yes.
Maybe also the camera, please.
Please, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, sure.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. Just a general consideration. I'm not sure I would talk about capitalism failure because it works, and it works very well under its antisocial tasks. So I would talk about a social failure of capitalism. But apart of this consideration, we know that increases in inequalities in the US.
Sorry, I don't hear you. Hello.
Sorry, Professor Signorino. Can you repeat?
In the West,
Professor Signorino.
Western countries. I tried without the camera.
I didn't hear you. Could you please repeat it again?
Without the camera is a better. Without the camera, yes.
Okay.
Okay. I will repeat. So, increase in inequalities in the USA and in the Western countries is strictly connected with the decline of collective bargaining power and workers' security and job stability. So social business is under the point of view of business, but what about the workers? Do you think is it possible to stand for a new season of global unionism or global system of guarantees for workers so as to avoid the kind of immerserization of workers and policies of social dumpings? And the second one is about social business in itself. We know it is a very beautiful cultural challenge, but does it remain on this ground? Or we can stand for a kind of institutionalization of this model?
Sorry. Okay. Hello.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the question. Does it?
Can you repeat the second question, please?
Yes. Does it social business? It's a beautiful cultural challenge. Does it remain on a cultural ground? Calling for a new expression of voluntary kind of unselfishness for people, or is it possible to institutionalize the model apart than organizing it?
Okay. I want to clear one thing. Thank you for your questions. Wonderful questions. Okay, so I want to clear one thing, that when we talk about the failures of capitalism, we are not against capitalism. We are not against competition. We are not against profitability. We are against the way capitalism is working, the way profit is used to exploit majority of the people, the way profitability used to concentrate wealth in the hands of few. We are not against efficiency. We are also in favor of efficiency. If you look at the 7 principles that are given by Professor Yunus while he defines social business, it is clearly mentioned that social business is required to be profitable. So to make profitable, you need to be competitive. You need to participate in the competition. But we say that competition shouldn't be used to make profit at a rate which is beyond the imagination, or which is a vehicle of exploiting majority people. This is what the argument is. So Professor Inu says that social businesses need to be profitable and need to be sustainable in the long run. So to be sustainable in the long run, you need to make profit, but that profit shouldn't be at the cost of others. That's the point. So again, we are not against the capitalism. We say that we need to change the current mechanism of capitalism. We are in favor of capitalism. Okay, this is the point. So again, when you talk about the workers' rights, actually, if we look at the 7 principles, there is a point where he says that you need to make sure fair, judgment to the workers as well. That means you need to pay fair market wages to the workers. So that needs to be very competitive, and that should be fair. So when you say the term, use the term fair, that actually reduces the exploitation, because in most of the cases nowadays in the capitalism, wage rates are not fair, are exploitative. There is a huge difference between the average wage rate or the salary of the majority of the workers in the company and the compensation or the salary of the CEO. There is a huge gap, huge gap. So we, in social business, we say that we need to make sure that it doesn't happen. So that means social businesses are going to be in favor of the workers as well. It's going to be environment friendly. It's going to be gender, not gender biased, as well as gender friendly. Regarding the other question, you see, social business is not going to be is not going to promote socialism or another revolution, or is not going to promote the aid, charity, or voluntary things, or the non-government activities. Actually, we say that even NGO activities are not sustainable, because NGO activities or non-voluntary activities are dependent on charity. So when charity stops or the donation stop, all these activities get stopped as well. So that's the problem. So in our argument, we say that social businesses are going to be like normal businesses, and we have to actually promote social businesses like other businesses, through understanding that we have to participate in the normal competition and we have to be on profit. But the main difference that we are not going to allow the investors to take profit from the business, and that profit is going to remain in the company, is going to be invested. That's the difference that we make, argument that we make. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for the extra time that you give us. It's late in Dhaka, we know, so we have to finish our meeting. It was a pleasure to hear you. It was really, really clear, your explanation and your answers. So the next meeting is the last, and is the 20th of May at the same time, and there is a lot of speakers, so we'll spend some time more. Welcome to all of you again, and see you soon. Bye.
Okay, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you also from Professor Schiuma that had to leave for